Hello, everybody. Welcome to Balticon 55. This is a panel on trends in YA fiction, so I hope you're in the right place. If you are joining us, everybody, if everybody will come off, bring their screens back up. Meg and Valerie, we have a wonderful panel for you today. And I'm going to ask all of our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start and say I'm the moderator, Jeanne, and I write urban fantasy, space adventure, and paranormal romantic suspense. And I'm also one of the showrunners for Continual, the con that never ends. So Mary, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Mary Fan. I'm a young adult sci-fi fantasy author. In fact, I think pretty much everything I've published is YA, including Stronger Than a Bronze Dragon, which is a steampunk fantasy, and the Stars trilogy, which I recently completed. I also have a bunch of short fiction in various anthologies, and I'm the co-editor of the Brave New Girls YA anthologies about girls in STEM.
Oh, cool. Meg?
It'd be good for me to unmute. Hi, my name's Meg Eden. I teach creative writing courses all over Maryland, wherever they'll have me. I write mostly kidlit, YA, and middle grade. My novel Post-High School Reality Quest, about a girl who thinks she's stuck in a video game, is a YA.
Oh, excellent. Valerie?
Hi, I'm Valerie Estelle Frankel, and I read so many piles of YA. It's currently surrounding me in all directions, and I've been reading a lot of the 2020 stuff. And I write books about the heroine's journey, Hunger Games, Harry Potter, Star Wars, Doctor Who, whatever. So I'm really keeping an eye on the trends.
Oh, most excellent. We have an analyst in our midst. Yay. Well, that actually leads us right into the topic. What do you all see as trends that are beginning in YA fiction? There are a lot of lists of what to look forward to in 2021. What are some things you're looking forward to, and what do you see as a coming trend? Let's start with you, Meg.
So I don't want to say this is a trend, because this is just a good thing that is happening in YA and kidlit, but that there's more representation and diverse voices and own voices. And I just think that's a good thing for everything. I'm always excited reading more own voices and diverse voices, and just people I haven't heard from. So a lot of the books I'm really looking forward to for this year and next year are, from voices I haven't heard of. And as somebody that's neurodiverse, I especially love seeing more neurodiverse stuff coming out.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's a wonderful trend that I'm loving. Mary, what about you?
So in terms of, I guess, genre trends, I have noticed there has been, I think we were talking about this like before the panel, a lot more high fantasy that takes place in worlds that are not this world, some fantastical, like long ago, far away type of setting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a trend so much as it's just, something it's going to be part of the landscape now, because I think fantasy is always just going to be popular. And I think just the difference now is that there's more of a YA bent to it. And a lot of these fantasies tend to be kind of dark and mature too. I feel like before you'd have a lot of, fun, kind of more what we think of now as middle grade type fantasies. But now we have a lot of dark fantasies about, assassins who fall in love with their targets and such. And another is dark academia, which when people first started talking about it, I felt like the oldest person on the internet. I was like, what is dark academia? And it turns out it started off as an aesthetic, I think on TikTok, where it's just think of an old New England Gothic prep school with plaid school uniforms, and everyone has a dark secret. So dark academia is kind of a trend that's coming in right now. And I think it's because, teenagers are on TikTok and they love, anything set in academy. And I've also noticed a lot of anthologies lately, particularly contemporary anthologies.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't seen that. Valerie, what do you see as some of the trends?
Well, one interesting one, and yes, you could call this post-colonialism, is before we had the young lady discovers that she's secretly got magic or a heritage or whatever and gets in there and becomes the queen. Now we've got she becomes the queen in chapter 1, discovers how truly messed up the system is, and discovers that they really need to rip down the entire thing, even more than Katniss and her buddies.
Raise the world, start afresh. How
That's
interesting.
actually, I want to bounce off that because I think Valerie's, well, everyone's made a great point, but with Valerie saying about kind of like the discovering how messed up the system is, I think something we're seeing more in Kidlit and especially YA is kind of interrogation of complex issues and not being afraid to talk about uncomfortable things. And I think that that's really cool.
And in general, kind of, there's like, people are turning away from that chosen one narrative that was so popular about 10 years ago. And the funny thing about the way I feel like the TV and movie landscapes work is that they're a little behind the trends. So when Shadow and Bone came out on Netflix, it very much felt like, dude, this was a trend 10 years ago, but we don't do this chosen one stuff anymore. It was like kind of really weird to watch, being like, oh yeah, this was all the tropes from like 2012, but now we're all over them. And so, plenty of people, enjoyed it anyway. But
Oh yeah.
as a YA reader, me watching it, I was just like, ugh, I'm very meh on it because these are all the tropes from 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. I'm interested to know that dark academia is still a thing, or that it's shifted to darkness, because so many of the Netflix stories and that seem to be YA, and a lot of the previous trends seem to be the school of. Do you think that's still something that we're going to continue seeing, or is it shifting more towards, as Mary said, the dark academia? What do you think, Valerie?
Well, there's the theory of genre about how first you're trying out stuff, and then you get into the classic period where you've established how all the tropes work, and then you're starting to deconstruct and parody. I might call dark academia deconstructing and almost parodying the Harry Potter stuff. Okay, readers, you all know school stories. We've all done school stories till we barf, and everybody has already written their fanfic on why Slytherin is allowed to be a thing. Well, let's flip it. Let's play with it. Let's have our fun.
Well, that's an interesting take. What do you think, Meg?
I think schools are just a good setting. I think good books, there's kind of this marriage of the familiar and the unfamiliar. And so schools are a great middle ground. It's like everyone can relate to going to school, but then if you add this twist, I think that just makes it all the more relatable of an entrance into another world. So I think we'll probably see variants of the academic thing. I had never heard that term, Mary, of dark academia, but like
First time I heard it, I felt so old. Oh my goodness.
That's such a perfect term for it, though. So I think we'll probably see something like that in the future.
Yeah, what do you think, Mary?
I think you're right. School settings will always be popular because, well, let's face it, these are for teenagers, and where are teenagers? They're in school. And so it makes sense as a setting, because if you're writing about a 16-year-old, it's, like a logical place to set it would be at a school. I think what's interesting about the current dark academia trend is it seems to be a contemporary trend. So it's not like Harry Potter, which was a magic school. It's like, it's set in like a modern day prep school, which is a little fantastical in that it's probably nicer and more dramatic than a lot of like actual prep school, but there's no magic, there's no sci-fi. And I kind of wonder if it's stemming out of Gen Z's anxieties around college, because the race for college has gotten so much more intense than even when us millennials were applying. And I feel like Gen Z in general is a lot more anxious about it, and I kind of wonder if that's part of what's feeding this dark academia trend.
That's an interesting thought. So one of the questions that just popped up is if dark academia is a thing, does that mean darker fiction is growing in popularity in Kidlit and YA, and how dark is too dark? Valerie, you're analyzing all this stuff. What do you think? Is it a trend growing in popularity in Kidlit and YA, and what's too dark?
Anything the public is buying is apparently not too dark. I don't go for horror and torture and stuff, but the kids who read R.L. Stine, or I don't know if that they're even in print, and go on to the next level of darkness and creepiness. Yeah. Again, until the books stop not selling because everyone runs away going, oh my God, what's wrong with you people?
I think people who do that to me quite frequently. Mary, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think there is a trend towards darker, and I think it might be because in general the landscape is shifting less toward what adults think teens should be reading and more towards what teens actually want to read. Like I feel like if there was ever a time when, kid lit was, brighter and more like, morally like this is good, this is evil, that's probably because the adults in the rooms were just like, this is what kids should be reading. Meanwhile, kids are just like, nah, we want to read about kids killing each other, and taking down dystopian governments. And as for what's too dark, I feel like right now we haven't really defined a boundary, because if we think about like some of the most popular books in the past 10 years, like the Hunger Games, heck, it was about children killing each other. Like how much darker does it get? And yet that was the
Really?
biggest YA property around for years.
Yeah. Well, that and the Maze Runner series is, they're not killing each other, but they're in many cases not helping each other either.
And they're getting murdered in horrible, increasingly creative ways.
Yes, yes.
I just want to bring something up that I saw in the chat that's kind of goes back to our last question. A few university coming of age stories. And I think that's another trend that's worth pointing out, because there has been a call for more YA set in college, which we can talk about, how that relates to new adult and how that's different. But that is also a trend that has been going on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, Meg, so what do you think about the darkness factor, and is it growing in Kidlit, and how dark's too dark?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is growing. As to what's too dark, I think it's really a question of what the gatekeepers think is too dark. Gatekeepers are less of an issue for YA, I feel like, because a lot of the readers are adults. I think that's kind of a trend in YA too, is that we're getting, I think Mary has a great point of, it's a lot more of what teens authentically want, but I think it's also what adults want too. There's a growing amount of adult readers, as opposed to like what they want to enforce on kids, I guess is what I mean. But yeah, so I think like what librarians and what people want in school, like I've been told, if you curse on the first page, gatekeepers aren't going to like that, but maybe if you curse later, it's okay. Which is kind of interesting. I guess it's like that first impression you're setting. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a concrete answer. I just would be keeping in mind, like this is still young adult. So there are librarians and teachers and people like that involved. And so what they value is going to be an important factor.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because even with the surge in self-publishing, where many books, regardless of the level, are self-published, you still have the gatekeepers to a certain degree of what a parent will buy for a young person, or what a teacher will recommend, or a librarian will recommend. So it's interesting to figure. I mean, some of the YA I've read, they go very dark. So, obviously, like you say, Mary, the kids are like, yeah, kill them all. We've got another question that is, I've seen a lot of lit PRG, RPG, and game lit stories. What do you think draws people to that? I mean, the easy answer is we're a gaming generation now, and everyone is either plays games or is exposed to them with their peers. So that's obviously, just like school, going to come into the lexicon. But Valerie, what do you think is drawing people more and more to that game lit RPG sort of scenario in a book?
Games are active as opposed to, a book about reading, which we love so much. I mean, but you have to get around and move. So gaming does feel like a natural way to do storytelling, in that our games have much better stories every decade, every generation. I always played the ones with loads of stories in them. Vivian Van Velde, it's for middle grade or maybe even younger, had a lovely one called Heir Apparent, where she's trapped in a game and it's gonna kill her, so she's got to do all the fairy tale stuff right. And I was sitting there going, yeah, it's got stakes, it's got action, we've gotten into the magic world. You did it right, lady.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, Meg, you wrote about that. So what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, it's interesting because mine's not a lit RPG, but I think it's kind of like a cousin to that. It's in the form of a text adventure. The whole novel is narrated as like, you are doing this, and then the character doesn't want to do that, so they fight back against the game, and it's a dialogue between player and game, and she'll die and respawn, and she'll get to try that scene over again. So I enjoyed that form, one, because it I think like Valerie said, it creates tension and stakes. I had these characters and nothing was really happening. And somebody said, well, what if you wrote it like a text adventure? And then suddenly I had an antagonist, this game that's trying to tell her what to do. And so that created plot for me. The character wants to do something else. What are her choices going to create? What consequences will there be for the choices? So I think similar things are why people are drawn to lit RPGs. There's so many options. You get to kind of see, like, if people make these certain choices, what are the different branches, which a novel is typically linear, and we only get to see what one choice would make. So I think allowing those different choices is a really cool option.
Yeah, that's a fascinating alternative realities kind of branching off from the same interest starting point. That's really cool. Mary, what are your thoughts?
I will confess that lit RPG somewhat mystifies me, especially since sometimes it feels like there's multiple definitions. Like, I've heard it as, okay, it's kind of a story that takes place within a game, but it's still kind of like a traditional story. I've heard it as, it's almost like you're watching the author play a game that they made up throughout the book, and it has like all these stats and, like, you know, numbers and such, like showing how the game is actually being played. So it's almost like watching someone's Twitch stream, but a book. And then I've also heard, you know, almost like as a choose your own adventure kind of thing. So I feel like there's lots of different definitions out there. And to be honest, it mystifies me, but I can see why it'd be popular because, you know, like you said, we're a gaming generation. Like, everyone grew up on games and decided, you know what, we don't have to outgrow them anymore.
Right. Well, no, absolutely not. That is not an acceptable option. And I think too that it's another trend that we're seeing in terms of, as Valerie indicated, the games themselves are becoming richer in story. And so people want sort of that same story world without the activity of playing the game. And so I think you sort of get the back and forth there. And I for one think that's great. As a writer, you want to, as many places you can sell stories to, great. So one of the questions that was in the prompt for and discussion for this panel at the beginning is, what do you think are some trends that have fizzled, that started out really strong or blew up really big and then have kind of sort of dropped back down? What do you think, Meg?
I think the dystopia thing is out for now. Everything's in waves. So it's like, I think editors are saying we've got enough dystopia and COVID's happened. We don't want that. So I think I have seen a lot of sales in contemporary fantasy and traditional fantasy. I think for that reason, it's just like, let's get out of COVID, let's escape somewhere. What are some other trends? Mary mentions the chosen one narrative is out. I think I've been hearing that trilogies and things like that are less popular, or perhaps maybe harder to sell to editors. Maybe it's more of if the first book does really well, then we have a conversation about that more. But I think standalones I'm seeing a lot more of, as opposed to full-fledged series or duologies. My friend Roseanne Brown has a duology that's a fantasy. So,
well, that's interesting. Valerie?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I never would have expected the trilogy would go out. I never would have expected Hero's Heroine's Journey would have gone out, because I would have said, you know, that goes back to the Bible and the Odyssey and Gilgamesh and will exist for all time. We'll just buy new ones. But yeah, and I've written more extensively on this other places. We do seem to be getting out of that. The other thing is, in the Twilight generation, everybody was saying, okay, vampires have now been played out, so we're switching to angels. And after angels have been played out, we will clearly switch to the next monster. And that didn't seem to happen. I mean, now I would say vampires are out, angels are out, and no, we didn't replace them with evil mermaids or something. We have just plain old moved on because we're sick of the whole shelf of those. And thanks goodness, there are a few good ones on that shelf, but...
Ooh, evil mermaids, that might work. Mary, what are your thoughts?
You know, what's interesting about trends that have fizzled is that I feel like they fizzled, but only a certain type of it. And what I mean by that is, so, like, you know, we had the vampires of the Twilight era of like 08 and such, and that's kind of fizzled, but those were white Eurocentric vampires. And now we have people clamoring for, can we get some, you know, Korean vampires? Can we get some African vampires? Like, why, like, you know what, I think, you know, the white Eurocentric vampires fizzled out because, well, frankly, we have too many of them. But vampires in and of themselves, I feel like people will always be interested in, especially if you bring another angle to it. I think the same goes for all these other genres that have fizzled too, like dystopia. The type of dystopia that fizzled was the white, cis, chosen one narrative, where it's like, here's Katniss, here's whatever that kid from Maze Runner is called, where it's like, here's your white kid saving the world. White Kids Saving the World is out, but I think there are still going to be dystopias that are, seen from a different, kind of post-colonial perspective.
I think that's a really great point, because I think you also had, they were in some ways novel in and of themselves, not because they were dystopian, but because they had a woman featured as the central character. So at that point it was like, ooh, we've done something new. It's a girl. And yet the narrative is still a good story and still a good place to set a story. But I think you're right, Mary. I think we'll have better, broader scope of heroes and heroines. Because one of the things I noticed in the trends list was there's a new book that's coming out, and it's called Lore. It's by Alexandra Bracken, and it's Greek myths, and it's based on Greek myths. And I think people got a little tired of the Rick Riordan, all the gods and goddesses, and there was a big flurry of people writing gods and goddesses. But I think a well-written one that has a different twist is always going to be popular. Anybody else want to think any other trends you can think of that kind of?
Thank goodness this one fizzled, because I hated it. That was the Cichlid Trend that John Green's Fault in Our Stars kind of kicked off. It was a very short one, thank God, but I hated it so much.
I'm not familiar with it. What is it?
It's basically where you have two attractive teenagers, one or both has an attractive disease, not like an infectious disease or something that might disfigure you, because God forbid they not be attractive, but like an attractive disease. And it's all about the tragedy of falling in love when you know you're dying.
Oh, okay,
still
yeah.
being attractive.
Yeah, that one can just die a horrible death, frankly.
Dying prettily.
Yeah. We have another question from the group. What about portal stories where someone from this world goes through a door and has adventures in a fantasy world? Is this trending or still trending? What do you think, Valerie?
Still trending. I mean, that's another one that has just never gone away. Lopizona impressed me. She is not just an undocumented American, she's an undocumented werewolf. And when she goes off to the special camp for werewolves and they all stare at her because there's never been a female werewolf, we really see the own voices and doing a twist on the same thing. And I just read The Way Back, which again might be more middle grade, I'm not sure, it's really in between there. And that one does a very dark Jewish shtetl world with the portal fantasy, and they've got to go into death. So I would say the played out vanilla fantasy world is out, but we're constructing more interesting fantasy worlds because we know that.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think, Meg?
I don't think I can say any more. I think Valerie kind of hit it. I guess I feel like I've seen less of portal fantasies, but that may just be I am not encountering them.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. What do you think, Mary?
I think portal fantasies have moved out of YA and into the increasingly popular middle grade category. So they're still around, they're just no longer YA.
Interesting. Well, there might be an opportunity in YA to bring it back with a different twist.
Yeah.
So another question is, do you think having illustrations in more books will trend? I love the mixed media when I see when I get to read and look at pictures. You see that, with the middle grade Nathan Hale books, with manga being very popular. Do you think, and really old fiction for YA, while vanilla-ized and also very patriarchal, and you will believe this, did have a lot of pictures in it and line drawings and that sort of thing. Do you think that will come back? What do you think, Mary?
I would like it to, because I love illustrations. But having been a self-publisher and like kind of an indie publisher, I don't think it'll come back just because illustrations are expensive and publishers are very risk averse. So I think for some bigger properties, like if you're already an established name and you put something out, they might put illustrations in that because they know you're going to sell and this will just make it sell better. But I think if you're, an unknown debut, I don't know if they'll invest in those illustrations, unfortunately.
Right.
That said, I do think there's going to be more graphic novels.
If they know there's a return on investment, they'll do it, but perhaps not otherwise.
Yeah.
What do you think, Meg?
I was going to say graphic novels are trending. So I think if you can get in the graphic novels boat, then that's great. But otherwise, I think what Mary said is spot on. It's expensive and it can be a risk.
Yeah. What do you think, Valerie?
Well, I personally don't go for illustrations. The words should be doing it on their own. I mean, in a world where people have so many entertainment channels and we're trying to entice them into the books, anything that works, and back to, I guess, the sales figures will speak for themselves, whether this is cost effective and or attracting people. I've also noticed the books with shiny gold on the covers, the books that have all of these section dividers that are all fancy. So yeah, I've definitely seen fancier looking books, whether they're doing illustrations or not. And again, I assume that we're trying to entice the people who like shiny objects.
You know, it's interesting because we were talking about this just before the panel began, and I'd like to ask y'all about that. Do you see the same thing I do, as just what Valerie's saying, much more visually attractive, grabbing cover graphics? What do you think, Mary?
Yes, definitely, because the book as a physical object has sort of become an art form in and of itself. And I think this is driven by Instagram, to be honest, because, people like Bookstagram is absolutely huge. Like,
Yeah.
it ranges from everything from full-blown influencers who just a teen in their bedroom with their books, but everybody wants something beautiful. And you know what? Who can blame them? Like, we all like having nice things. And these days with, ebooks and everything, I mean, to have a beautiful book with, a nice foil, lettering, and you lift
Right.
up the dust jacket and there's another illustration underneath, and there's like beautiful section dividers. Like, it's just nice to have something pretty. And we're a very photo-based generation now. Like, everybody is obsessed with taking photos. And so I think publishers have caught on. I've also noticed that titles are getting bigger too, so that when you take that photo, the title stands out. Because if you have this like little title on there and you're trying to take, this big flat lay in front of, your bookshelves, you're not going to see it.
Right. I actually first thought about this trend when I saw this book, which I picked up and looked at and then bought strictly because of the cover.
So
I just thought it was stunning. And I noticed that has become much more the thing. And that's interesting because I actually saw that book on Book Talk. And I thought, wow, that's pretty. And then I went into the bookstore and then I thought, wow, it's really pretty in person too. And picked it up, read the flyleaf and went, okay, I'm going to buy it. So what are your thoughts, Meg?
I can't really add anything. I think Mary's spot on. The Instagram thing is huge. I think as someone that sells at events, it's really important that people are engaged with the cover and they want to buy it as the physical object. Yeah, and I think just wanting to stand out because there's just more and more books than ever before. So I tell people you should judge a book by its cover. A cover is purposefully designed to be judged and to meet expectations for a genre so that you will want to pick that one up.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. Another audience question is, recently people have been saying that the Divergent series kind of ruined the YA dystopian chosen one genre by jamming so many tropes into one series. What's your stance on that, Valerie?
I can't believe Divergent ruined an entire genre of Hunger Games clones. It was the most Hunger Games like of the Hunger Games clones, but again, there was a whole shelf of those. I was rather surprised the last movie, they were doing the thing where they split the third one into 2 movies, and then they didn't want to make the part 4, so they were going to put it on TV, and I don't know if they even did that, but again, that was a surprise fizzle for me. But Divergent didn't reach Hunger Games levels, but it certainly seemed to do okay, even though, yes, people were going, really? We're sorting them into Hogwarts houses in book 1, really? But
what are your thoughts, Mary?
I don't think Divergent killed Dystopia. I think Dystopia in general killed itself because it didn't evolve. Because we had just a slew of Hunger Games wannabes that didn't realize that what Hunger Games did was something completely new at the time. So you had a slew of books that were all in this oppressive society. A white 16-year-old straight girl saves the world and has 2 beautiful white love interests, one who's like friendly and one who's dangerous that she must choose between. And it was just the same story over and over. So yeah, I don't think it was Divergent that killed it. I think the genre just didn't evolve. It didn't, try to shake things up. It was like, let's just tell the same story, but with, slightly different oppressive, horrible regimes.
It wasn't divergent enough. Meg, what are your thoughts on that?
I love that point that Mary just made about the genre not evolving enough. And I think Divergent is just a parable of what can happen with any trends. Like, I think there's always, it's just like such an obvious example, but there's always like, once something's popular, there's a million clones that do that. And I think what we need to remember as writers, or those of us that write, is that we need to always be pushing the genre forward and doing something that hasn't been done before. And what can I say? What can I add that hasn't been in the conversation yet? Or it could just be another Divergent.
Right. Or it will be just another Divergent. Yeah. Another question from the audience is, what types of humor are trending in YA? And I've noticed dark humor, but are there other types, Mary?
I mean, you know what? Rom-coms are still very popular, and the kinds of comedy you see in rom-coms, situational humor, even the occasional pratfall here and there. Awkward situations are always going to be popular in teen lit because teens can always relate to that. Dark humor if it's a dark book, and otherwise just kind of like sitcom-y stuff if it's like contemporary.
Yeah, I picked up one, You Have a Match. That one's by Emma Lord, and then I picked up another one called The Faux Love Story, PHO instead of FAUX, and also super cute and very, very funny. Meg, what do you think? What do you see trending?
I think something I think about for humor is voice. I think agents and editors talk all the time about voice and how important that is, and so I think having a voice and a character that has a sense of humor. I mean, I think there are various ways that can be done. You mentioned dark humor. I think that's totally legit. But I think like having the humor come through the voice is something that's being pushed a lot more.
And for those of you out there, you either have that or you don't. That's very hard to do and very hard to learn. Valerie, what are your thoughts on the humor issue?
Yeah, I agree that it's coming out of voice. And man, all my examples are middle grade. The Sal and Gabby Save the World and Destroy the World was all voice, and it's just delightful listening to them basically sass the reader. They're having such, well, I mean, it's the author, but the author is having such fun with it. And I just read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which
wonderfully fun.
Yeah, and that one is both voice and you thought you could overlook this kind of magic that, somebody like me would never account to anything, but guess what? And I see a lot of that too. You've dismissed this entire category of people, but we are pointing and laughing at how much you're getting stuff wrong, people. And what was the romance? They go off to the island with the kids who all have the magical talents. Everybody was raving about it like mad a year ago. It's not really YA either. No.
Somebody asked if it was Descendants.
No. I can.
Well, if you think of it, let us know. So I've seen the wry humor and T. Kingfisher in her guise as a YA author as T. Kingfisher. It's Ursula Vernon, who generally writes middle grade, is always very sharp and wry. Another question is, eons ago, no matter the age of the novel's protagonist, anything with science fiction or fantasy tropes was considered YA by the literati gatekeepers. Today, what's the max age of a protagonist considered acceptable for YA novels? What are your thoughts, Meg?
It's a good question. I think Mary had brought up that college YA is becoming more of a thing. So I think the age is, you can go up a little bit more than before to maybe early 20s. Though I would say age isn't the biggest factor. It's probably more the actual emotional narrative, where it's kind of finding your place in the world as an individual in that coming of age kind of sense. I think that's almost more important than age. Like, for example, this isn't speculative, but Tiffany Jackson's Monday's Not Coming is a story about a girl whose friend disappeared and she's trying to figure out where she went. And they're 8th graders, and the ending is very dark. That she finds her friend was like frozen in a freezer by her mother. Like, it was really dark. So it's the kind of thing where so I guess it goes back to the dark sense. So like that, it was the sort of thing where by age you would have thought this is a middle grade because of their age, but because of the emotional narrative and that dark ending, they decided to move it up to YA. So there's like multiple factors. It's the age of the protagonist. It's kind of like the ending of if you're ending darker or with more hope, and kind of the emotional narrative of if it's like, where is my place among my friends and family versus where is my place in the world as a human being at large.
Right. I did a panel last night on coming of age stories that aren't YA and how much they had it. And it really, a lot of us, the discussion revolved around how no matter what the age, that coming of age is finding your place in the universe and all that sort of thing, that it's just more traditionally YA because at that's usually the point where you do that. But I think, you can find that in your early 20s and have it just be as meaningful, or as an 8th grader and be just as meaningful for that group as anything else. What are your thoughts, Mary?
I think it's kind of hard to say exactly where the line is, because when it comes to YA, ultimately it's a bookshelf category, and the bookseller is just going to put it on whichever shelf they think it'll sell as. That's why, for example, The Book Thief was marketed as YA in the US, but as adult in the UK. It's the same book. It's just, booksellers in the US were like, okay, this is a teenager story, we're going to put it in the teen section. And meanwhile, the UK was like, we're going to put it in the adult section. Around the same time, though, All the Light We Cannot See won the Pulitzer. It's about like a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old or something, but it was very much marketed as literary fiction, not YA, even though if you read it, it's very much from the perspective of teenagers. So it's really a fuzzy line because it's such a marketing thing. I will say, as a writer, if you want to play it safe, keep it under like 18, like make it high school age. That said, you will always see exceptions. You will see, something on a YA shelf with a 21-year-old college-age protagonist.
Right. And it really is a lot about the marketing versus the actual hard numbers. Valerie, did you have any thoughts on that?
I always read whatever I feel like, and I clearly don't care if it's MG, YA, or adult. So yeah, there have been a number of adult coming of age stories. Before I was thinking of Cerulean Sea, and that is, a 40-year-old having the plot of what we often find 15-year-olds having that plot arc. So
right,
you can do anything, but yeah, the publishers, of course, are sitting there with their, if you're trying to sell it to 16-year-olds, then your protagonist must be this age.
Right. Or no more than this age. Yeah. Another question we got is, I just read 2 book set where each book was different voice, 2 different characters, point of view in the same world building, set one right after the other in time, but then in a new voice. Does this style have a name? Is it an old trend or new trend? Is it even a trend? It's Isabel Banez, woven in moonlight and written in starlight. Valerie, you're our analyst. What do you think? Is it a trend?
I don't think I've read any of that. Everyone has a different voice. Like, yeah, I just read Queen of the whatever and then King of the Conquered, or maybe I reversed that, which was, basically let's hear one book from Katniss and then the next book from Peeta kind of concept.
Right.
Or 2 sisters or something. And yeah, I am seeing a bunch of that. Maybe that's the getting out of trilogies thing. Maybe that's the emphasis on, we're trying not to privilege this character over that character, so let's see them each get a book and share the plot. I'm okay with that. It's all these books, probably the same trend, where character A and B are switching off chapters, that just personally I find that annoying because I've been reading very fast and skimming very much, and as we keep popping between these 2 friends, 2 enemies, 2 frenemies, 2 sisters, I just keep going, can we just tell one story per book? But that's me.
I saw you nodding down there, Meg. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I definitely do see that as a trend, and I think it may be almost a defense mechanism against publishing and the fear of like, will they take more books? Because I think if the first one does well, you're able, because like I often see that those are typically standalone. It's usually a duology, and it's usually like you could, like my friend Kathy McMillan has Sword and Verse?
Word and verse.
Yeah, yeah, she's got a duology like that, and it's 2 books. They're from different perspectives, but they're in the same world. And it's like the second book is the princess having to deal with the rebellion that the first character caused. So it's like you could read both of them separately, but they work together. So I think that it's a nice way that you can sell books that, like, if one doesn't work out well, you don't have to necessarily market them as working together. I know I'm talking to somebody recently who was saying, you know, my first book didn't do great, but I'm going to try, and in my second book, it's going to be sold as something separate, but I'm going to kind of have hints to that first book. So then if that does well, then I can create this third one where it's like those 2 characters interacting. So it's like, it's a more flexible means than a trilogy or something where it's like, you really got to do it that way.
Right.
And it's just kind of fun being able to look at stories from different perspectives and create new options. So I think there's a lot of reasons that that's becoming a thing.
Yeah, that's cool. Mary, what are your thoughts?
I just want to agree. I think it, like you said, it is a defense mechanism against, you know, the almighty publishing machine, where it used to be, you know, okay, I wrote book 1, I ended it on a cliffhanger, and hopefully they'll pick up book 2. Now it's like, I wrote book 1, you can read it as a standalone. Oh, I got a contract for book 2. Well, I'm going to write another standalone, but from a different perspective. That way I can market each one separately. So if someone's like, oh, I haven't read the first one, can I read the second one by itself? You can say yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. We have one more question we're going to be able to get to before we have to wrap up. And that is, do you all see a trend of book length? Are books getting longer or shorter? Or, you know, you've all said that the trilogy is not doing well, but do you see like standalones getting longer or shorter, or is nothing different? Valerie?
I might guess around the same. I was just reading some really fat ones, although they were not heavy in content, they were just fat. And that's something else I see in YA, the kind of Twilight model of let's just Twitter about our feelings for 500 pages and how much I can't have this guy I want, and also there's some magic. And I'm going, this is plot light, but we can still, you know, stop a door with these things. So, I don't really care about length either, just like I don't really care who it was written for. I just want a good one. I'm looking at my to read pile, and they seem all over the place in terms of fatness.
Meg, do you see any changes?
I don't know if changes. I think it's just really based on genre. You know, if it's speculative, it's expected to be a much larger word count. And then of course there's things like novel and verse that are becoming a trend, and then those are really short. Like mine's a middle grade that's 20,000 words because it's, you know, in verse. So I think there is a lot of flexibility about word count. What my publisher told me is that, you know, we want them to feel, the reader to feel like they're getting their bang for the buck. So, you know, if we want to sell it at this price point, we want to give them enough words, you know, to merit that price point. So yeah, I don't know if I'm really seeing trends with that. It's just dependent on genre.
Yeah. Mary, do you see a trend there or not?
I think contemporary is still going to be around the 70, 80,000 word mark. I think that's going to stay put. I have noticed that fantasies are trending a little longer. It used to be, okay, like, you know, if you had a YA fantasy, it would be about 90,000 words. Now you have something like Children of Blood and Bone, which is like 135,000 words or something. And that's
that one's a doorstopper.
Yeah, like it used to be, you might have a first book that was, you know, your typical 80, 90,000 word thing. And then as it got popular, the sequels would get longer, kind of like what happened to Harry Potter. But now you're seeing more where the first book, even a debut book, if it's fantasy, it's allowed to be over 100,000 words, but still under 150.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fabulous panel. We're going to have to wrap up. Unfortunately, thank you all in the chat for the wonderful questions you posed. What I'd love to do is have each of you tell us where we can find you on the web and here at Balticon, if that's the case. Meg, why don't we start with you?
You can find me at megedenbooks.com, which I'll put in the chat. I'm also going to be in the dealer's room at Meg Eden Books, so feel free to come chat and say hi and ask questions about writing. And we will also be in Watertable after this. Just wanted to interject that. Mary, what about you?
You can find me online at maryfan.com or on Twitter and Instagram at Astral Cult, and I'll put that in the chat. And I have a panel tomorrow on The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and one on Monday about sustaining tension.
Oh, excellent. Valerie.
Yeah, a whole bunch of panels here. Doing Jewish sci-fi next, if that interests people. And tomorrow, The Heroine's Journey, which fits in with what we were talking about. And yes, I have updated it to 21st century, and links in the chat.
Excellent. And I'm Jeannie Adams, your moderator. You can find me here all through the weekend. I've got about 6 more panels here at Balticon and a reading on Monday. And you can also always find me on Continual, the con that never ends, which is on Facebook and YouTube. And thank you everyone so much for being here. We'll be on Discord on Water Table after we finish.